March 14, 1967, 2:17 a.m. Bumpy Johnson walked into Teddy's lounge on 145th Street knowing 15 men were waiting to kill him. The door closed behind him with a sound like a coffin lid. Inside, Frank Costello's top enforcers sat at tables around the room, blocking every exit. Tommy the Butcher Russo stood near the bar, hand inside his jacket. Vito Genovese himself sat in the back booth, smoking a cigar, watching. This wasn't a meeting. It was an execution. The Mafia had spent 3 months planning this moment. They'd bought off Bumpy's driver. They'd leaked false information about a heroin shipment. They'd made sure every exit was covered, every witness paid off, every cop looking the other way. Bumpy walked to the center of the room, no bodyguards, no weapon visible, just a 60-year-old man in an impeccable gray suit moving through a room full of killers like he owned it. Vito raised his hand. Tommy drew his gun. 8 other men followed. 15 weapons pointed at Bumpy Johnson's head. The room went silent. And then Bumpy smiled, not a nervous smile, not a defeated smile, the smile of a man who knew something nobody else in that room knew. "Gentlemen," Bumpy said quietly, "before you pull those triggers, you might want to check your guns." What nobody knew, what the Mafia would only discover in the next 47 seconds, was that Bumpy Johnson had orchestrated this entire night. And what he did in that moment didn't just save his life, it forced the 5 families to leave Harlem alone for good. To understand what happened in Teddy's lounge that night, you need to understand where Bumpy Johnson stood in 1967. By March of '67, Bumpy Johnson was 60 years old and had ruled Harlem for nearly 3 decades. He wasn't just a numbers king. He was an institution, a protector, the man who kept external threats from devouring his neighbor. But age changes everything in the underworld. Younger gangsters were rising. Frank Lucas was starting to build his heroin empire. The Italian mob saw weakness. Vito Genovese had just gotten out of prison after serving 7 years for narcotics trafficking. He came out bitter, broke, and determined to rebuild his empire. And Harlem, with its lucrative numbers racket and growing heroin market, looked like easy money. The 5 families had tried to move into Harlem before. Every time, Bumpy pushed back. In '62, they'd sent collectors. Bumpy sent them back without kneecaps. In '64, they'd tried bribing city officials. Bumpy had better connections. In '65, they'd attempted to muscle in on the numbers operations. 3 Italian enforcers ended up in the East River. By 1967, the families were done negotiating. Vito Genovese called a meeting at Mama Leone's restaurant in Little Italy. All 5 families sent representatives. Carlo Gambino, Joe Colombo, Tommy Lukes, even old Frank Costello came out of semi-retirement. The topic was singular, Bumpy Johnson. "We've been trying to take Harlem for 15 years, Vito said, his voice rough from prison cigarettes. "Every time this one man stops us, one man, how does that make us look?" Carlo Gambino lit a cigar. "Bumpy's got the community. We can't touch him in Harlem. Anywhere in those 40 blocks, he's got eyes on every corner." "Then we don't go to him in Harlem," Vito replied. "We bring him to us." The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. They couldn't kill Bumpy in his territory without starting a war they might not win. But if they could get him outside Harlem, away from his protection, isolated and vulnerable, then 15 armed men could solve a 15-year problem. What the 5 families didn't know was that Bumpy Johnson built his entire legend on staying 3 moves ahead. And by the time they'd finished planning, Bumpy had already heard every word. The man who brought Vito's plan to Bumpy was someone the Mafia never suspected. Marcus "Quick" Williams. Marcus ran numbers for the Lukes family in the Bronx, but had grown up on 135th Street. His grandmother still lived in Harlem. She'd been in the hospital the year before when she couldn't afford her medication. Bumpy paid the bill without being asked, just like he'd done for hundreds of Harlem families over the decades. 3 days after the Mama Leone meeting, Marcus walked into Small's Paradise and asked for an audience with Bumpy. "They're setting you up," Marcus said, hands shaking as he spoke. "Vito's people are spreading word about a big heroin shipment coming through some warehouse in the Bronx. They're gonna leak it to you through Carlo, make it look like Carlo's breaking rank, offering you first crack at intercepting it." Bumpy sat at his table, cards spread in front of him for a solitaire game he'd been playing. He didn't look up. "When?" "March 14th. 2 a.m. They're saying the warehouse is on Brook Avenue, but that's not where they want you. They'll redirect you to Teddy's lounge on the way, say there's been a change, get you inside, doors close, 15 men with guns." Bumpy moved a red queen onto a black king. "How much they offering you to tell me this?" Marcus looked offended. "Nobody's offering me nothing, Mr. Johnson. I'm here because my grandmother's still alive because of you. That's blood debt." Bumpy looked up for the first time. He studied Marcus for a long moment. "You go back," Bumpy said quietly. "You tell them you tried to warn me, but I didn't believe you. You tell them I'm too proud, too old, too stupid to see the trap. Can you do that?" "Mr. Johnson, they're gonna kill you." "No," Bumpy replied, returning to his cards. "They're gonna try." Over the next week, Bumpy made preparations that nobody outside his inner circle understood. He had meetings with people who didn't make sense: a locksmith from Queens, a chemistry professor from City College, a retired NYPD armorer. And he visited someone the Mafia definitely didn't expect: Vito Genovese's own gunsmith. Tony Spagnuolo had been making custom weapons for the Genovese family for 20 years. He had a shop in Brooklyn, legal on paper, less legal in practice. Tony modified firing pins, removed serial numbers, and turned legal firearms into untraceable murder weapons. 2 weeks before the planned hit, Tony got a visitor. "Mr. Spagnuolo," Bumpy Johnson said, walking into the shop alone. "I need your expertise." Tony nearly had a heart attack. Bumpy Johnson, standing in his shop in Brooklyn in Genovese territory like he was buying a newspaper. "I don't know what you're talking about," Tony stammered. Bumpy placed an envelope on the counter. "That's $20,000. I need you to do exactly what you do for Vito's men. Same modifications, same removal of serial numbers, same everything, except for one small change." "What change?" "I need you to replace every firing pin in every weapon the Genovese crew carries with pins that are exactly 1/32 of an inch too short. They'll look perfect, they'll feel perfect. But when someone pulls the trigger, nothing happens, just a click." Tony stared at him. "You want me to sabotage my own family's guns?" "I want you to save 15 men from committing murder they'll regret," Bumpy said. "Because if those guns work, those men die, not me, them." Bumpy pushed the envelope closer. "There's also a letter in there, insurance policy. If anything happens to you, that letter goes to Vito explaining exactly who modified his weapons, so you're protected either way." Tony opened the envelope, read the letter, looked at the cash. Bumpy Johnson had just made him the safest person in New York while simultaneously destroying the Mafia's entire plan. "When do you need this done?" Tony asked. "They're planning something for March 14th. I imagine they'll have you work on the weapons a few days before. Do what they ask, exactly what they ask, just with my modification." Tony nodded slowly. Bumpy reached across and shook his hand. "One more thing," Bumpy said. "After March 14th, you might want to take a vacation. Florida's nice this time of year." That was the moment everything changed, because Bumpy Johnson didn't just know about the trap. He turned the trap into theater. March 13th, the night before the planned hit. Bumpy received the call he'd been expecting. It came from Anthony Strollo, one of Costello's men. "Bumpy, I got information," Anthony said, voice low like he was sharing a secret. "Big heroin shipment coming through tomorrow night, 2 a.m. Brook Avenue warehouse. Carlo's breaking rank, giving you first shot at intercepting it." Bumpy played his part perfectly. Suspicion, questions, reluctance, finally cautious acceptance. "I'll check it out," Bumpy said, "but if this is a setup." "No setup," Anthony assured him. "This is Carlo trying to make peace. He's tired of the war." The next night, March 14th, Bumpy drove toward the Bronx. No convoy, no soldiers, just Bumpy and his regular driver, a young man named Isaiah who'd been with him for 6 months. Isaiah was nervous. He'd heard the rumors. Everyone had. "Mr. Johnson," Isaiah said as they crossed into the Bronx, "something feels wrong about this." "It is wrong," Bumpy replied calmly. "Everything about tonight is wrong. Keep driving." At 2:03 a.m., another call came, Anthony again sounding urgent. "Change of plans. The shipment's been moved. You need to go to Teddy's lounge on 145th. The contact's waiting there." Isaiah looked at Bumpy in the rearview mirror. Teddy's lounge was Genovese territory, a Mafia social club barely disguised as a bar. Going there was suicide. "Drive to Teddy's," Bumpy said. "You sure, Mr. Johnson?" "I'm sure." Isaiah drove. But here's what Isaiah didn't know, what none of the Mafia soldiers positioned around Teddy's lounge knew, what Vito Genovese himself didn't know. Bumpy Johnson had spent the last 2 weeks preparing for this exact moment. The guns wouldn't fire. That was step one. But Bumpy had done something else. Something that turned a death trap into a message the 5 families would never forget. March 14th, 1967, 2:17 a.m., the same moment we started with, but now you understand what's really happening. Bumpy walked into Teddy's lounge. The door closed behind him. 15 men watched him enter. Tommy, the butcher, Russell, stood near the bar, hand moving toward his weapon. Vito Genovese sat in the back booth, cigar smoke curling around his face like a dragon. The other soldiers, enforcers from all 5 families, the best killers New York had to offer, positioned themselves around the room. Every exit covered, every angle measured. This had been planned down to the second. Bumpy walked to the center of the room, no weapon visible, no fear visible. He moved like a man walking into his own living room. Vito raised his hand, the signal. Tommy drew his gun, then Paulie, then Frankie. Then all of them, 15 weapons emerging from jackets, from waistbands, from shoulder holsters, every barrel pointed at Bumpy Johnson. The room went absolutely silent. You could hear the ice melting in abandoned drinks. You could hear someone's breathing getting faster. You could hear the slight creak of leather as fingers tightened on triggers. And Bumpy smiled. "Gentlemen," he said, voice carrying through the silence like he was addressing a church congregation, "before you pull those triggers, you might want to check your guns." Confusion rippled through the room. Vito's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Pull your triggers," Bumpy said calmly. "See what happens." Tommy looked at Vito. Vito nodded. Tommy aimed at the floor and pulled the trigger. Click, nothing. His face went white. Paulie tried his weapon. Click, Frankie, click. One by one, 15 men pulled 15 triggers and heard 15 clicks. 15 useless weapons in a room that suddenly felt very different. That's when the back door opened. Isaiah walked in. Followed by 12 men Bumpy had positioned outside, not to attack, but to witness. "I've been counting on you," Bumpy said, looking directly at Vito. The exact same words he'd said to Big Sam 9 years earlier. The words that had become legend in New York's underworld. "I've been counting on you to be exactly this stupid." Vito's hand moved toward a knife on his belt. "I wouldn't," Bumpy said. "Right now, 30 men are surrounding this building. They're not here to kill you. They're here to watch, to witness, to go back to their families and tell them what happened tonight." Bumpy walked closer to Vito's booth. "You wanted to kill me outside of Harlem because you thought I was weak there. What you don't understand is that Harlem isn't a place, it's a principle. And that principle is simple. You don't beat Bumpy Johnson by being smarter. You don't beat him by being tougher. You don't beat him at all." He turned to address the entire room. "Every gun in this room was modified 3 days ago by your own gunsmith. Tony sends his regards from Florida, by the way. He decided to take that vacation I suggested. Smart man." Bumpy pulled out a single piece of paper and placed it on Vito's table. "That's a list of every police officer you paid to look the other way tonight. They've all been reassigned. That's also a list of every phone tap I've had on your operations for the last 6 months. And at the bottom, that's the phone number for the New York Times. One call from me and every name on this list becomes public record." Vito looked at the paper. His face went from red to white to gray. "So here's what's going to happen," Bumpy continued. "You're all going to walk out of here tonight. You're going to go back to your families, and you're going to tell them that Harlem is off limits. Forever, not because I'll kill you, but because you can't beat me, you can't outthink me, and you can't touch me." Bumpy turned to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing, the warehouse on Brook Avenue, the one with the heroin shipment. The FBI's been watching it for 3 weeks. Funny coincidence." He walked out. 15 men with useless guns and a humiliation they'd carry forever watched him go. Word of what happened at Teddy's lounge spread through the underworld faster than a police raid. By sunrise, every soldier from Boston to Baltimore knew the story. The 5 families had tried to kill Bumpy Johnson. They'd brought 15 men. They'd paid off cops. They'd planned for 3 months. And Bumpy had turned their assassination into a magic show, making their guns disappear with a modification they never saw coming. Vito Genovese called an emergency meeting the next morning. Same restaurant, same representatives, very different mood. "We're done," Carlo Gambino said before Vito could speak. "We tried force, we tried money, we tried strategy. The man's a ghost. He sees everything. He knows everyone. We can't beat him." Joe Colombo agreed. "Every time we move against him, we end up looking weak. Last night, 15 of our best men stood there with useless guns while Bumpy Johnson walked out. You know how that makes us look." Tommy Lukes, who'd been silent, finally spoke. "Harlem belongs to Bumpy Johnson. Brooklyn's ours. Queens is ours. The Bronx is ours. We got enough territory. Let the old man have his 40 blocks." For the first time in history, the 5 families formally agreed to stay out of Harlem, not because they feared Bumpy's violence, because they respected his mind. March 14, 1967 became a date mobsters whispered about in social clubs, a cautionary tale about the man who couldn't be beat. As for Tony Spagnuolo, he never returned from Florida. Smart man. He lived another 20 years running a fishing boat in Key West, far from the families that would have killed him for what he'd done. Bumpy Johnson died 11 months later on July 7, 1968, not from a bullet, from a heart attack. He collapsed in Harlem's Wells restaurant, surrounded by friends in the neighborhood he'd protected his entire life. But the lesson from that night in Teddy's lounge lived on. The most dangerous weapon isn't a gun. It's knowing what's coming before your enemy does. It's turning their plan into your victory. It's understanding that real power isn't about who can hit hardest. It's about who thinks furthest ahead. Bumpy proved something that night that most gangsters never learn. Strategy beats strength. Preparation beats aggression. And the mind is deadlier than any weapon you can carry. If this story got you, hit that like button right now. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? We're dropping these Bumpy Johnson stories every week, and trust me, the next one's even crazier. The story of how Bumpy walked into Lucky Luciano's office unarmed and walked out controlling half of Harlem's policy racket. Drop a comment and let me know what would you have done in that room. Could you have stayed as calm as Bumpy? Turn on notifications because next week we're covering the time Bumpy Johnson made the NYPD commissioner publicly apologize to Harlem. You don't want to miss that. Remember, in Harlem, respect wasn't given. It was earned. And Bumpy Johnson earned his by being 3 moves ahead of everyone who ever tried to take him down.